No.
I do have some questions on behalf of Paul Hersbach. Your Honour, only brief ones.
Can you hear that, Cardinal Pell?
I can.
It might be best if I go to the lecture.
I think it might be best if you go to the centre and we can make sure you're on the camera.
Can you see me, Cardinal?
Yes.
My name is Cash and I appear on behalf of Paul Hersbach. You no doubt would have viewed his evidence that he gave in these proceedings. Is that the case, Cardinal?
I'm aware generally of his evidence.
And that wasn't the question. The question was, did you view his evidence, Cardinal?
No, I didn't. I have a job here in Rome.
Looking after its finances, is that right?
That's my main task.
And that was your primary objective when you sought to preclude, I suggest, as many common law claims as possible arising out of sexual abuse at the hands of your priests. Is that right?
No, as a matter of fact, it's completely wrong.
Well, I may not go to heaven for this, but I suggest you're being disingenuous, Cardinal. If you just listen to this, I suggest you're being disingenuous, Cardinal, when you say your primary objective was to help the victims. What do you say about that?
Could I be allowed a chance to speak?
Yes, you certainly may, Cardinal. You respond as you wish.
I have addressed this matter earlier in this hearing. The fact that I did not view the evidence of your client was I was aware of the transcripts in general terms was because this happened before my time on the watch. I have already stated, and I repeat, that my primary concern was not financial, and I'm also well aware that through the Melbourne response in its non-adversarial, private and expeditious treatment of these matters, that money could be provided to people who would have got nothing or very little through the courts. Not to mention the public ordeal they would have to go through to obtain that money, or to be refused.
Sir, during the course of your evidence, what you told the Royal Commission was that in making the payments to victims under the Melbourne response, you did so because, or the Catholic Church did so because it accepted a moral responsibility for the acts. You told us that, didn't you?
Yes.
And as the leader of the Catholic Church in Melbourne, this was not a trucking company, was it, sir? This was an organisation. This was an organisation of the highest integrity, one which you would expect would conduct itself in keeping with the teachings of Jesus Christ. That's right?
Unfortunately, many actions have shown that members of the Church have not always acted with the highest integrity. Certainly, we should act according to the teachings of Jesus Christ, and that was exactly what I was trying to do when I set up the Melbourne response.
And so you agree with me that this is an organisation of the highest integrity. That is, unfortunately, not all trucking companies conduct themselves in keeping with the teachings of Jesus Christ, do they? This is completely different, isn't it, your organisation?
I have just explained to you that the Church is not always of the highest integrity.
Yes,
it existed for 2,000 years and there is a long history of sin and crimes within the church, and one of the functions of the leadership of the church is to control and eradicate this.
But your response, and you would expect this of the Catholic Archdiocese, wouldn't you, would be to take on board your moral obligation. And as distinct from a trucking company might not be so concerned as with moral obligations as might the Catholic Archdiocese of Melbourne. That's fair, isn't it, to say, you might think?
We strove to meet our moral obligations by instituting the first comprehensive scheme here in Australia with 4 arms to it. A judicial decision, counselling, compensation and pastoral support out in the parishes. We were among the front runners in Melbourne in addressing these scandals, and I would suggest to you that that is entirely consistent with Catholic tradition and the teachings of Christ.
In accepting, as you did, the moral responsibility for the conduct in question, leaving aside what a trucking company might do, the Catholic Archdiocese of Melbourne, would it not then have had, as a matter of decency, an obligation to place no impediment in the way of a victim to receiving complete and fair compensation?
Let me say a couple of things on that. There are quite different levels of responsibility. If there is negligence, improper, inadequate preparation, then, and the authority is remiss, then there's a higher level of responsibility than there might be when good procedures, but when mistakes still happening, crimes were still committed. I am in favour of the general prescriptions of the common law, and if they are followed, I would, because they are very conducive to establishing the truth of particular situations, and so I would not be, be recommending a wholesale abandonment of those common law protections.
Perhaps I'm making it too obtuse, but can we reduce it to simplistic language, please, sir? I'm simply putting to you that your organisation is the Catholic Church, an institution of the highest integrity. In those circumstances, don't you accept that if you recognise a moral obligation here, that you shouldn't be standing in the way of full and fair compensation for victims of sexual abuse by priests of your organisation? Is that not an unreasonable suggestion?
It is a reasonable suggestion that there is full and fair compensation related, of course, to the gravity of the offence and the suffering of the victim.
You don't deny for a moment that someone like Paul Hersbach and his father Tony endured the most horrendous of obscene behaviour in their presence and were deserving of significantly more than they actually received, surely?
I don't know Mr. Hersbach's case
beyond
the general outline, because that happened before my time as Archbishop. I have no evidence or inclination to deny what you're saying.
Sir, had you taken the time to even view a recording of the evidence that he gave in these significant proceedings, you would have seen or heard Paul Hersbach describe how it is that initially when I signed the deed of release I felt some relief, some better. But he feels that having signed it and having received some money, he's come full circle. He's still within the control of the church. He told us about how he told us about how he felt that victims their healing process would be assisted if they were released from the restrictions that the deeds impose upon them, namely the prevention of suing the church. With, as you say, your primary objective being to help the victims, sir, you'd no doubt, in light of that evidence, suggest that fairness would dictate that they be released from those restrictions. Is that fair to say?
I'm not in favour of requiring a deed of release.
Do I understand your evidence? Can you explain that answer to me? I don't know if I understand it with respect. Are we losing signal?
I think, Mr. Cash,
No.
the Cardinal really has made his position plain.
Sure, Honour, please.
In relation to the deed of release, and he spoke of the action he took in Sydney. I think we do understand what his position is in relation to it.
Thank you, Your Honour. No further questions, Cardinal.